Welcome to UnHypnotized. I'm excited to announce our first sponsor, QuickBit, the crypto boutique. QuickBit is a Bitcoin first company that specializes in hardware wallets, seed storage, education, and all Bitcoin needs. They've got tons of experience, provide fast shipping and excellent customer service, and they're authorized resellers of Blockstream, Jade, Trezor, Stampseed, and more. QuickBit is owned by my good friend Dale. He actually orange pilled me, and he is a wonderful person to do business with. I highly recommend checking out QuickBit. These are real Bitcoiners running a real business. We're back with another episode that we're going to just jump right into and unravel so many beautiful philosophies and thoughts about life, God, spirituality, and anywhere else this conversation takes us. We've got a special guest with us today, Erik Cason, who I'll now welcome to the stage. Hi, Erik. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Do you want to just give us our audience, a little clip about yourself, or what you like to talk about?
Yeah, so my name's Erik Cason. I got involved in Bitcoin in late 2012. I was at Coinbase from 2013 to 2017. I left after the block size wars and my disappointment about how that went. And then after that, I joined Unchained Capital in 2020 briefly to kind of help them scale their team. What really brought me to Bitcoin was the philosophy of it. When I first encountered Bitcoin, it took me a couple touches, but once I got it, I was like, okay, there's something really, really important going on here. And I understood it resolved kind of the totalitarian economic nightmare that we live within. But what it took me a longer time to sort of unravel through reading a lot of philosophy is that, in my opinion, Bitcoin resolves some of the most quintessential questions in philosophy. And because of that, I wrote a book called Crypto Sovereignty, The Hidden Political Philosophy of Bitcoin, where it's a smattering of essays that cover a number of different topics. But at the end of the day, I feel that Bitcoin is the quintessential philosophical object of modernity, and it's part of what allows for us to redeem humanity from, in my opinion, what is the evil that is fiat money.
Mm. Yeah, this is a direction that this show we love to, you know, cast our gaze and have a conversation about, because we're not just focusing on this, up and down of the 58K to wherever to infinity. We're really looking at Bitcoin as a solution to evil, a solution to evil, if I could say it that way. And so I really look forward to kind of opening the door on some of these topics that you write about. And after reading some of your smatterings, I did really find like my own mind opening up to like, oh, wow. Like it's not even just the financial or the systemic problems that Bitcoin could potentially offer us solutions and new ways of doing things, but the philosophical, the I am, the like being human on earth. And so I'd love to just open the door to that if you want to start to chat about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is kind of a huge question, if not like the biggest question. And so I think first of all, I understand the triggering that some people might have of trying to label fiat as evil. And first of all, like unpack what is evil. And I think if we look at other philosophers such as Hannah Arendt, in her book, the Eichmann in Jerusalem, she speaks about the banality of evil, and she goes into how Eichmann, he was a Nazi general that was in charge of shipping the Jews off to the Holocaust, so he's largely responsible for the death of more than 1 million individuals. And when he was on trial, he maintained the whole time that what he did was ethical, that he had done the right thing because he had a duty to the German national government and he was fulfilling his duty. And if people don't fulfill their duties, society goes into chaos. And Ardent was like, look at how when we approach this man with a question about his ethical conduct and evil, he's actually incapable of thinking about it. Like he literally cannot have the cognitive function to actually self-reflect on what he's doing as being wrong. And so what's truly evil is fundamentally a lack of being able to think about what one's actions are doing and self-reflecting about it. And if we look at what fiat money is, like fiat in Latin means let it be done. It's a decree to allow for something that is not true to become true, such as the creation of money out of nothing. So like this is actually an ethical thing when we look at it. So why should governments be allowed to create money for themselves? A lot of people do the like, well, they build us roads and they give social services and they love us. And it's like, well, if we reflect on the history of the 20th century, is that actually true? And when you actually pull back the layers, it turns out that the 20th century was one about accelerating genocides of different types, the radical expansion of the state. And through the radical expansion, we can see about 100 million people were systematically murdered by their governments in the 20th century. And part of what allowed for that function to actually happen was the creation of fiat money and the ability to use that money to then make tools of war, surveillance, and other things, which is currently where we reside. So to me, the question of evil is actually one about self-reflecting. And when we reflect that on our greater global environment, we have to admit to ourselves the fact of that there is a group of individuals in the world that get to freely create money and reward it to themselves without any consequence or thought about how that has tertiary effects. To me, that's fundamentally evil because when I connect that to the war economy, most people who are involved with that process are incapable of going, yeah, actually, that is pretty wrong that we're using, hundreds of billions of dollars to create weapons of mass war and surveillance. That at the end of the day, those aren't ethical things that I want to support or want anything to do with. But most people are totally captured and trapped in a way that they have no capacity to actually be able to go, huh, I probably shouldn't support this system. And also on that note, in the Nuremberg trials, one of the things that was established is that if your government is making illegal wars against other people, you should actually be able to engage in tax resistance against them directly. And like that's in the Nuremberg Code.
Mm, that's a good point. And I always like to have compassion for humanity and every one of us that can really feel powerless against, say, our tax dollars going to like fund wars that we don't agree with. And, that feeling of just having to contribute to something or feeling like we have to contribute to something that we do not want to see in our world. I've always liked to really vote with my dollar and choose to purchase or spend my money on what I want to exist more in the world. But when it comes to tax dollars, it's like we don't get to choose where our money goes. So I think that that's a nice area to illuminate and also have compassion, but also with that understanding, like, how long are we going to take this for? And I really like what you said about evil. And as you were describing it, it made me think of hypnosis
Mm-hmm.
because there's an authoritative aspect. There can be an authoritative aspect to hypnosis, or they'll say, people that are used to following orders and have been really trained to follow the orders for the good of their job or for the good of the country or the good of their position are actually the most hypnotizable.
Absolutely.
Right? Because
You know, I,
they've learned to, let like bypass the critical factor to follow orders.
yeah, and it's just route conditioning, and most of
Mhm.
us vastly underappreciate how many impressions are put on us daily, in addition to the way that the structure itself has conditioned us, really since children. And from us going into kindergarten, needing to listen to a teacher and being taught a pedagogy of education that's a banking model where like I have knowledge, you must get it, you submit to me, I give it to you. Like this is all part of a conditioning of that you, like you're dumb. You don't have the answers. You need me for access to knowledge. Like that's not a true educational process. A true educational process is us both learning together and learning from one another and creating something together. That's
Mhm.
not something that is really normalized in our world today. In addition to the fact of that, all of these people in power and government and different roles, like they have a very, very deep investment in allowing for this system to continue because it rewards them. even though the fact that most of these people engage in, and again, I understand that this word is inflammatory, but I think it's true. They're fundamentally parasitic. Like they don't create anything of real value in the world. And they go, well, I'm organizing the economy and this, that. And I go, well, is that actually true? And is that actually serving for everybody? And for me, the big problem is when I look at the American government and what it spends money on. Sure, I do get roads. Purportedly, I'll get Social Security when I retire, but doesn't look like that'll work out. When I look at the spending, most of these things don't serve the American public in any meaningful way. And to me, one of the things that's one of the grossest hypnosises that we've been given is the idea of democracy. If we're actually democratic, why the fuck can't why can't I vote on being able to stop war? Because to me, like, that's really important. I've met people all over the world who have lost families, limbs, everything for no other reason than a wrong place, wrong time, wrong nationality, wrong religion.
Mhm.
To me, that's the most important political thing is I don't want anything to do with that. So
Mhm.
why can't I vote on that if we're democratic? And why am I told that if I vote for the right person that we can create change? Is it possible that this is actually part of a systematic capturing of us in such a way to allow for us to believe we can get change without it? And like I was struck today that like I have a neighbor who she was very rah-rah about getting RFK elected. And I like RFK for various reasons, but RFK dropped out of the race. He endorsed Trump. And I saw that she replaced her RFK sticker with Kamala Harris. To
Oh.
me, this is a perfect example of that hypnosis of that you actually wanted RFK. When RFK dropped out of the race and you were told that voting is the only way to create change, you capitulated on your values. And now you're going to vote, for all intents and purposes, what seems to be like a less competent or capable Mao. And I'm not saying that the less competent or capable other member is going to be more capable of creating
Yeah.
change, but they're part of
Yeah.
the same system that's designed to put somebody in a role who you don't
Yeah.
actually want there. But
Well,
because we're
and
taught voting is the only way to create
true,
change, we
true.
believe that even with the factual evidence that it doesn't.
Well, and also that continued hypnosis that somehow choosing someone outside of yourself, even if they don't really align with your values, is the only way.
Hmm.
And that's something that I know we connected on the first time we met before recording this episode of like the hypnosis of the media and just how much, because I think even now people understand, like there's a lot of people that understand. I mean, there's a ton of people that know that like, the media is just lies and hypnosis. But the people even that still watch legacy media and still like make some decisions in their lives about it, they'll go, "Well, yeah, I know it's not all true, or I know they put the worst thing or they sensationalize." But they actually still believe that what they're being told is generally true. And they're not necessarily seeing the lens that it's emitted
Yeah,
from.
and that idea of emitting, I think, is important because like it's
Yeah.
radioactive. Like it's not there's no way to view the media, even if I'm like, oh yeah, like that's dangerous and lies and stuff. Like I'm still gonna get fucking cancer because I'm exposing myself to it.
Yeah.
And so like until you've actually made the decision to not expose yourself to anymore, you like that's the only way to reduce harm. And
Mhm.
so to me, I find it really fascinating that people will be like, "Oh, like I watch Fox and I know it's full of shit, but like they still say good things." And it's like that's
Yeah.
the point that I'm trying to present is that like people so underappreciate how much their ideas get fundamentally polluted just by the exposure itself. And so often I'll find myself captured in conversations that really I could have with anybody because the way that these have been ideas implanted into people's heads so that
Mhm.
that's what the topic of conversation is about, whether they agree with it
Right.
or not. A great example is the election itself is that people go, oh, well, who are you going to vote for? And I always go, I'm not going to vote for anybody. Why the fuck would you ever do that? And they're like, what? You won't vote, but then how? And I'm like, you actually believe that if I vote for either the less capable Mao or the less capable Hitler, that either one of them are actually going to make a substantial and meaningful difference to America. Like, look at what's going on around us, you guys. Like, there's some really crazy shit going on that's really dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah,
And it
there's so
and
much going on right now.
And by
Every
us giving our power away to and, like, I wanna be clear, like, voting works, it's really good. Voting in the current corrupt system is an
Mhm.
explicit scam on having you believe that their system of organizing and voting makes sense when it doesn't. What I talk about when voting is the idea of a radical social collective where individuals get together, no matter their nation, state, religion, whatever, and they actually collectivize themselves in a meaningful way to elect representatives that represent them that they can withdraw at any point in time. I'm very
Yeah.
interested in radical democratic action that's fundamentally opposed to the
Yeah.
state.
And I mean, maybe somehow, like, as you're saying that, I'm just thinking, like, maybe that's actually how people kind of perceive it. Like, you know how perception is and it's not truth. Maybe that's how people perceive it on some level. But I do want to dial back for a moment just to the media because I know that we have a wide range of people that view our show
Oh, cool.
and Canadians too. I'm in Canada,
Yeah.
and it's not like our, political system is better or is the voice of the people or is, giving people any power to choose the country that they want, you know? So it's very similar, plus Canadians are quite captured by the American election just like the rest
Yeah,
of our
you guys
a
are
lot of the world
fundamentally an
anyway.
imperialist providence of
Yeah,
ours.
like, we're in there with you, and Canadians are talking about this too, and, you know, it reminds me of something I learned really early on in my career when I used to still work with children, and how children the way that came to me that their parents brought to me with extreme anxiety and panic attacks and all these things, the main correlating factor was that their parents listened to the news.
Hmm.
The news was on regularly in, like, I'm gonna say 99% because I can't think of one that wasn't. So much so that it got to the fact when a person or parent brought their child to me, that's the first question I would ask, and sometimes I wouldn't even have to do any hypnotherapy or help the child at all because we could just get the parents to stop exposing the child to the news, and the condition went away. And that's when I started to really realize, like you were saying, the effects of just having it even emitted into your psyche or into your subconscious in a way that even as an adult, when you have a critical factor, not like a child that doesn't even have that ability to filter what comes in, so they just take in everything as truth. But even as an adult, you know, with the ability to critically think, if you're not really cautious about what you might be taking in, whether you believe it or not, then it it can erupt even the own your own power, like even the trust in your own intuition, in listening to your innate wisdom, in being guided by the visions and the inspirations and the synchronicities that life has for you if you're willing to just listen and be careful about, you know, the things that might be causing a filter on you to be unhappy or anxious or sad or even just not at peace.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, what the news is inherently creating an incessant and ongoing noise to drown out that inner voice and make it absolutely incapable of being heard. Like it struck me as you're talking that anyone who strongly identifies them as a scientific materialist, like they're going to sort of laugh at what you say, and they're like, "Ha ha ha!" Like innate wisdom and blah, like that has nothing to do with the material world. And to me, like it's really sad and unfortunate because like we all have that inner voice and spark inside of us that can actually allow for us to allow true cognition, but because we're part of a system that is so pedantic about impressing on us that you have nothing inside of you of value at all to the world, and that you must fill yourself up with all of the different things and trinkets of this material world to understand it, when actually the inversion's true. Like you actually have all the answers inside of you. You know what the truth is, and you know the path that you should be seeking. The problem is that that voice has been so thoroughly and completely drowned out that most people don't understand it, listen to it, or if they do hear it, it terrifies them because they think that maybe they're schizophrenic or crazy or something. And those sort of labels are utilized in order to harm people in such a way and not have them understand the innate beauty that's inside of them.
True. Yeah, I like that too because it's so true because the research, you know, would show that, well, you can't just depend on yourself. Like, and we're not talking about independence or hyper independence. We're actually talking about interdependence
Hmm.
and recognizing our oneness and how we're all, accessing the information or the solutions to the challenges that we as a humanity face. And
Well,
so we can definitely resonate with what someone else is saying or read like you've done, a lot of reading to formulate your views and or even, philosophize and gain knowledge or, learn from other people. But I think what we're really saying is end of the day, though, come back to yourself, checking in with yourself, being careful of how much noise that you're exposing yourself to so that you can really hear that truth in yourself.
well, and to me, like this all comes back to why Bitcoiners tend to be radical truth seekers for first and
Mhm.
foremost. Is that so? Like in my involvement in Bitcoin, there used to be a great website that might still be around called Bitcoin Obituaries. And when I last checked it several years ago, there was more than 300 obituaries. So that gives you an idea from the start. Pretty much everyone has been like, Bitcoin will fail, it can't work. It's the same apparatus of media saying you're wrong, can't work, it's bad, all of the garbage. Turns out how
Mhm.
wrong they were. And as wrong as they were, that's given me more and more personal empowerment to recognize how wrong this world generally is, how
Mhm.
often there's intense amounts of hubris and ego that are involved with it. And that ironically, one of the core, almost like spiritual functions that Bitcoin seems to have is that, like, you must submit to it. Like, everyone who gets involved with Bitcoin since I've been involved and beyond, there has to be a point in time where they go, I was wrong about this. It sucks that I was wrong about this, and I'm getting Bitcoin at the price I deserve, but that's the cost I had to have for being wrong. Literally every single person who owns Bitcoin has had to make that choice at some
True.
point in time, realizing how wrong they were about when they first encountered it. And to
It's
me,
very humbling.
that's such an important process of dehypnotizing us from the world, because there's been this entire economic financial apparatus at play that has told us can't work, won't work, it's wrong, it's stupid, it's illegal, it's bad, it does all of the terrible things. And yet somehow Bitcoin has still been successful more so than any other financial object in the last decade. Why? Is it
Mm.
that Bitcoin might actually align with the truth that we believe things of economic value should have in the world? Or is it an inherent error that has carried on for 14 years and will collapse into itself?
Yeah.
I personally believe the former is true. And it turns out that I don't to me, the creation of fiat money, it's ethically and inherently and economically wrong. There is no reason why value should be created out of nothing in order to serve essentially a global military war machine. And that's inherently
Mhm.
skewed development over the last 100 years in a direction to essentially enclose life more and more and create governments bigger and bigger. And that's why governments today are literally 100 times larger than they were a century ago. It's because of the way that the fiat monetary machine has essentially hamstringed all economics everywhere under the guise of this really horrific lie that we believe because we've been told to believe it, and that it's right to believe it, and that it's true to believe it, despite the fact that that doesn't align with our reality at all. And that's part of how the process of hypnosis works. It has
Mhm.
no alignment with truth. It's just about route conditioning and repeating. Can't work, can't work, can't work, can't work. Why would you do that? You're an idiot. Follow us. It's safer over here.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
dangerous over there.
don't fall into these myths and misconceptions. Yeah, I think that's why it was so natural for me to once I understood more about what Bitcoin really is, because I had Bitcoin, I had my same fall from innocence, when I didn't know what it really was, I just thought of it as an investment or a smarter way to invest and didn't even know that much. till I lost, till I I shouldn't say lost, but till I didn't see the value in it. And so I think though that's why it was so quick for me once I saw it, because in building my hypnosis career, the only thing I ever had to do was just speak to the myths and misconceptions of hypnosis for people to understand the potential therapeutic aspects for themselves, to be able to, be in a relaxed state, kind of drown out all of those, or just like actually get away from those voices or all of the noise, to really just feel into and be with themselves. And it just made sense to me how every few months there would be something, some entertainment or articles out again, putting this fear of hypnosis into people. Like, it started to really make sense to me why, right? Like, we don't want people to truly understand the value of hypnotherapy, because that would mean like a bunch of people would become unhypnotized ultimately from these like programs and things that have kept them down. So then once I saw that people were reacting the same way or very similarly when I would speak about Bitcoin or to other people sharing about Bitcoin, I was like, oh, this is something. Like,
Yeah,
we have hit something good here.
and in my opinion, like money is the one place where we have collectively created a global hypnosis that like we literally accept these paper scripts that inherently have no value for things of real value. And that
Mm,
has nothing to do with truth at all, but only authority. And for me, like on the cover of my book, I have an image of Hobbes's Leviathan that he wrote in 1651. And the reason why is this is the first book presented on statecraft and about how the state actually functions as an entity,
mm,
and why and how the sovereign is created through the monarchic dynasty. And it's very important that he sort of surmises the entirety of the king's power as actores not viritus fac legit. And the reason that, and that phrase in Latin means authority, not truth, creates legitimacy. And that's where we are in the world today, is that we're so deep into that we're in a highly misfunctional economy that doesn't have any sense at the bottom of it. And it's completely nihilistic, but it functions because of that inherent authoritarianism that
mhm,
doesn't have a ground at all. It's fundamentally baseless. And through that process of hypnosis, people have learned to simply take authority as being truth. And to me, like, this is one of the reasons that I'm very pedantic about people don't understand how to think, because thinking is a rigorous process of chaining together logic and reason through a proof of work. And that's why in mathematics, we need to do all of our work so we can go, look, I actually did the work. I can prove it and that it's available. This is something most people have gone away from because they don't understand that the purpose of questioning is the quest of going through those questions and really asking yourself deeply, is this actually true? Is there a chain of proof that I can utilize to actually see that this is true? And it's become a very, very detrimental thing in the world on a whole, because people think that the answer to questions are just the answer itself. And that's when we're very, and it's really dangerous, particularly in the world where we have AI and LLMs, where people are repeatedly thinking, I'll just type in the question, get the answer, good to go. And in my opinion, this is making everybody much, much dumber, because we're not actually trying to think rigorously anymore or engaged in the true process of questioning. And it's very dangerous because it allows for us to be lazy and not actually demand of ourselves to really question in a meaningful way.
mhm. Curiosity is the key. Yeah, in the topic of authority, that's one of the biggest shifts I see happening in the world today, which is part of even why I'm here having these conversations and, having a space where we can talk about these things, because I really believe that the age of authority is dying, even if it's not as fast as we want it to, but people are awakening more and more to this understanding that like authority of others over our sovereignty is not it. This is not the way to a humanity that cares for the well-being and abundance. And And, as we were talking about this, I kept thinking about how, if somebody's here and they're familiar with holistic healing or spirituality, and they hear us talking about Bitcoin and Bitcoin offering this solution, it does get me thinking about purpose and even potentially um, religion or Satoshi. I read on one of your essays about you talking about Satoshi as a prophet,
Mhm.
and I would love for you to expand on that for our listeners too.
Well, first of all, I find that the linguistic irony of that, the most profitable thing that somebody could have done in the last 14 years is listen to Satoshi. That would have been the most profitable thing anybody could have possibly done. Furthermore, like there's an actual spiritual prophecy that's involved with this too. And to me, like, first of all, we have to accept the nihilism that we're in. Like the truth is that we live in a neoliberal globalist world economy where government and a very small elite class of people essentially run everything and make all economic decisions for us. Like that's really, really, really dark. And how is it possible to actually try to redeem ourselves from this situation in any meaningful way when we have seen for the last 100 years anybody that has tried to present any meaningful resistance to this system, including internationally, that essentially like they will be fundamentally destroyed, and
True.
that's deeply alarming. And it seems like there's no conceivable way out of this because everyone's captured at this point in time. We're all known, monitored, surveilled. Like every single physical human being is monitored to some capacity today. But with perfect forward secrecy and the techniques of cryptography, Satoshi Nakamoto proved that there was a new and different space that we could occupy. And the entirety of my book is based off, well, not the entirety, but the starting place of my book is based off of a quote from Satoshi Nakamoto where somebody had brought up uh, that you can't find political solutions within cryptography. And his response to that was, yes, but we can find a small territory from which we can gain a new front of freedom. And like the purpose and that decentralized peer-to-peer technologies like Gunilla and Tor seem to be holding their own. To me, that's a direct quote that says, actually, there is a space in cryptography that we can find that can protect us in a meaningful way, that can allow for us to develop a new territory of freedom in the internet, which is a free and open protocol that anyone anywhere can use for any reason. And now with cryptography, which to be very clear is an artistry of the technique of secrecy under duress and war, and it's very important why we're using this technology of war within this, we can shield and protect our identities so that the state can't actually locate us and destroy us. And in my book, I have another great essay that's called The Sovereign, the Subject, and Crypto Power, where I point out that the core functionality of the state is identity. The only way the state is able to function as it does is through identifying individuals. That isn't true of how the state always functioned, but it made that inversion into a new form of state probably about 200 years ago, and then accelerated itself about 100 years after that. And it's an extremely powerful technique because the moment that you monitor somebody and that you know who their identity is, you have the power to label them either as a friend or a foe. And anytime that the state feels threatened by anybody, they make them into an enemy class. And that's really what the 20th century was a story about, was the state continually choosing to make enemy classes of people, both internal and external to the state. And I'm much more interested in internal enemies, such as Jews to the Nazi national government. It's really important to understand that when the Nazis killed all the Jews, they always stripped them of German citizenship first. And that was so that they could kill an enemy class and not kill citizens of the Republic. And this is how the state functions, is it utilizes an identifying function so that it can appraise whether or not somebody's dangerous. And if they are dangerous, they push them out of society or kill them. Bitcoin allows for a radical new identity that has nothing to do with our physical identities. There's an ability to take on hundreds of different identities if we want. And what becomes so powerful in that is now there's a true amount of sovereignty that you can have vis-a-vis cryptography. Because even if I choose to encrypt something, and I do it appropriately, and I don't expose my private keys and how I am doing that encryption technique, even if all of the governments in the world, with all of the energy and all of the time in the universe, choose to come after me to try to get that information, they cannot.
Mm.
Furthermore, I can imbue money in that now. I can literally have 12 secret words, or 24 or 25, depending on how you want to set up your security. And with that, those 12 sacred words, you can move money anywhere on the planet. So even if you're a dissident in Russia who's trying to escape and you get strip searched on your way out, you can still leave the country with most of your wealth. This is a radical and an important, impactful thing for when we look at a 20th century where more than 100 million people were actively killed by their governments. What would it mean if they weren't stripped of their economic wealth? Very similar to how all the Jews in Germany were stripped of their economic wealth before they left Germany. What if they could actually preserve some of that wealth in a meaningful way that couldn't be extracted from them? To me, this is the redeeming thing that is so important, is that we now have a kind of law that can serve everyone everywhere equally without exceptions. To me, that seems to be a quintessential philosophical achievement, because we're no longer talking about the law as being actualized by nation states through a process of prohibition and punishment, but it's a radically different kind of law that gives itself to everybody and allows for them to economically protect themselves. So it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim Uyghur in China. It doesn't matter if you're a Palestinian in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't matter if you're a Ukrainian on the Russian side of the border. And it doesn't matter if you're any other dissident class. You can actually protect your wealth against people who want to steal it because of the religion you practice, the color of your skin, or the creed that you've been raised in. To me, that's a radical collectivizing concept in humanity that has never existed before. Because for the first time in human history, I can actually collectivize my wealth with other dissidents around the world, and there is no conceivable way that that money can be stolen if it is secured appropriately, and properly. Now, that does demand a certain amount of personal self-sovereignty. But I think that through that personal self-sovereignty, we not only learn about the importance of cryptography, but we learn about the importance of self-sovereignty, and that it turns out that if I'm relying on somebody to get fresh food, they can cut that off. If I'm relying on people to protect me, they can not show up with their weapons. If I'm relying on individuals to make sure that I'm taking the right medication to help myself, they can actually give me poison. It turns out that knowledge is first and foremost the most powerful form of sovereignty that we have. And that in that form of knowledge, through cryptography, Bitcoin offers us a radical new kind of protection. And now we're expanding beyond Bitcoin. And I'm very proud of myself for the title of my book being Crypto Sovereignty and not Bitcoin Sovereignty, because through something like Nostr, we're now seeing a radical new way of using cryptography to create social media. And I believe that we'll get, before the end of this decade, there'll be a number of extremely powerful peer-to-peer decentralized encrypted tools that will allow for people globally to choose new social mechanisms in order to empower themselves and change the face of the earth.
Right. Like if it wasn't needed, it wouldn't exist. Like it
Yeah.
wouldn't have come into existence if it wasn't needed. If we weren't being like censored on all these platforms, if we were able to have the, control over what we've like spent time to earn and save. And, one thing that came to my mind, well, two things. The first thing is, well, in Canada, I've been talking to some of the people that had their bank accounts even just for donating to the convoy that went to Ottawa that actually ended the mandates that were discriminating against anybody who wouldn't put an experimental product into their body. And they took, they froze their bank accounts. And that's a perfect conversation that I've been having about Bitcoin, because they actually needed a solution. That so many people that needed a solution like this that can really understand the value of having something that cannot just be taken because of your desire to vote for something that you want to see more with your money in a democratic society.
Well, and so like let's take a
I
look at what that value of Bitcoin is. Like sure it has the
Mhm.
market exchange rate value, but also
Mm,
like with the example you just showed that it seems to me that this idea of the legality of the Canadian legal system
yeah,
that there actually isn't a deep basis for it because it seems that on its face it should have been legal and constitutional and a protected right to donate to individuals
yeah,
that you thought. Turns
yeah,
out that that's not true.
right.
So it like if that actually is not true, that your rights can be suspended due to an emergency, what does that actually mean about those rights? And this
Yeah.
is another thing that I wrote at length in my book. I have a chapter called Bitcoin in the State of Emergency. And there's another philosopher, Walter Benjamin. He deals with the idea of the state of emergency, and he points out that the state of emergency is really the truth of our everyday lives. Of that, we're always finding ourselves under various different states of emergency that power the state. And the contemporary example is since September 11th, 2001, every single person in the world has lived under the United States state of emergency under the direction of the
Mhm.
Patriot Act and what terrorism is, and that it's the evil enemy that must be defeated. And however, it turns out that that's the very thing that allows for like, as an American citizen right now, like, one of the unequivocal rights I'm supposed to have is I'm always supposed to have habeas corpus, meaning that, like, if I'm arrested, I'm supposed to be charged with a crime and then put in front of a judge and a jury in order to be seen if I have actually committed a crime. Under this state of emergency, I no longer have that right. That means that the government can literally just abduct me, put me in a floating prison camp that they have out in the ocean, and torture me for as long as they want to and never charge me with a crime.
Yeah.
And because of that state of emergency, that is a legal action the government can do. And the reason I'm so pedantic about this is that that labeling can be used for any purpose at any point in time under any duration. So if it turns out that I don't know, you're a sexual reproductive health worker and that you want to help women in say the Northwest Territories get access to that kind of medication. If there's a very conservative government in power, there's no reason that they couldn't label you as a terrorist.
Yeah.
And so, like, this can be applied to anything, anywhere, for any reason. And
Yeah.
I'm very pedantic about because there is that capacity and availability, that means that there is a non-zero chance that you can be that person. And
Right.
if you can be that person,
Right.
what do you do? And I always like, well, people are like, well, no, I'll never be that person. That could never be me. And I go, awesome. I'm really happy you're having this conversation with me because I am that person. And now you are associated with me. And just by your association with me alone, that could make you viable to be canceled and have your bank account taken or even be arrested.
Mhm.
What are you going to do? How are you actually going to protect
Mhm.
yourself? And
Mhm.
to me, Bitcoin and firearm ownership are one and the same thing. There's a reason that before the first crypto wars, that cryptography was classified as a munition. It was classified as the same thing
Mhm.
as a grenade. And the reason why is because it is a technology and a technique of war. That's why I also believe both Americans and Canadians, everyone should own guns and know how to use them. Not because I ever want you to use them, but it turns out that there are actual situations where people could threaten your lives. And it turns out that it could even be those same guys that wear blue and are allowed to have guns. What are you going to do when those people are threatening you? Or if somebody shows up at your house that you don't want and they're threatening you? Are you always going to need to give your sovereignty away to someone else to protect you? Or are you going to be thoughtful enough to understand that you need to be empowered in order to protect
Mhm.
yourself in the most edge
Mm.
cases possible? Both
Yeah.
Bitcoin
Yeah.
and guns serve the exact same purpose of
Yeah.
protection.
'Cause that's almost now, like, when I think of it, it's just a naive trust, and I don't know if we spoke about this or if I read it by anything that you wrote, but it just made me think about how this is a lot to take in, you know?
Absolutely. And like, I want to
And
be the first to say, I'm sorry. And also, uh, really allowing for ourselves the grace and the pain to go through To
Well,
me, this
that's
is
what
about
I
a
was
dark night
gonna
of the
say.
soul and
That's
really
but that's
engaging
exactly what I was gonna say. I was
in
gonna
the true
say,
nihilistic
you know
existentialism of what it
yeah,
is.
but to me, that's what I was gonna say because a lot of my listeners, like, they have followed me for years talking about the dark nights of the soul and how it is the journey through to transformation. And yeah, we did touch on it. That's why it came to my mind too. And just taking this moment for me to acknowledge, right, like that's a part of this journey that is hard because in order to get to that place to see Bitcoin for the potential that it truly has and what it can really offer us in terms of a solution for humanity, but even for our own safety, we have to be willing to look at why we would even need it. And that's what we're talking about here, right? And that is the dark night of the soul.
Yeah, it's truly terrifying because like I want to be very clear, like I don't care about Bitcoin as number go up or what
Yeah.
its value is. What I care about is the fact of that, like there are people, if they didn't have access to Bitcoin, they very well could be killed.
Yeah.
Like there are people that without Bitcoin, they would have no way to ever escape the poverty trap that the global South is trapped within, and most people never escape. And
Mhm.
furthermore, to me, like the nihilism that has rotted out our society and that has allowed for, the majority of Americans who die now, it's either done through like the highest reasons for people killing themselves are suicide and drug overdose.
Mhm.
How did we get to a society that's purportedly a technologically advanced one where most people are so deep in their suffering that they choose death or drug overdose? That's
Yeah.
horrific, and it goes to show the very real spiritual suffering that's going on because look, like this place fucking sucks. The fact that most people have to slave away 40 hours a week doing something that they fucking hate, that hollows out their soul because they've been told that this is the system that serves themselves. Like I'm sorry, I don't buy that. And I'm really sorry if you do, but what I want to invite you to is that if you allow for yourself to descend into the darkness and the abyss of that nihilism,
Yes.
you'll
Yes.
actually discover that like this system, it is truly groundless. There is no base within the abyss. And by
Yeah.
you demanding of yourself to gaze into the abyss, it will gaze back into you. And as it gazes back into you, know that you actually have a tool of empowerment that can allow for you to go, yeah, we are in the abyss. There is no basis to this thing. And with that, I can choose to empower myself, the self sovereignty that is not only to own my own money, but to take care of my own health, to take care of my own mind, to take care of
Yes.
my own soul, and
Well,
what
and like
those
you
things mean.
said, like, have a will to live because it makes sense to me why we're numbing or why it's so easy to fall into all of these, quick dopamine hits and numbing and even drugs, all these things that can keep us from having to feel that pain and having to gaze into the abyss. And it reminds me of that book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. That's just beautifully written about this. Yeah. And one of my favorite parts, I actually made a hypnosis audio about that because around that, because what I heard you saying is like, yeah, when you're willing to look into that abyss and like he says, you think that it's gonna just be all darkness and terrible. So you shy away from the abyss, but what it really is pure light.
Mhm.
Because eventually, when we're willing to just look at and I suppose feel the fear that comes along with that. Feel the fear that we might not be safe or feel the fear that we maybe can't trust other people with our safety and our freedom. But then find to see the light in a sense, to have a will to live, to recognize that I can take personal responsibility for my health and well-being and turn off the news and stop putting a bunch of eating food with a bunch of chemicals in it, and come back to what I can take care of and find people and ways to support the life that I want to live. And
Absolutely.
I think that that's maybe where it can be really hard, because when we're looking at just all of the problems, when we're looking at, like, to me, I think of the Tower card in tarot, which is just, it's all crashing and burning. Like, everything has to fall apart for it to be rebuilt again. And that gives me hope, to be honest, when I'm like, yeah, it all has to come crashing down so we can, have the phoenix rise from the ashes and give us a new way. It's just that I don't think it happens like in this all one, like it's already crashing down. The light is growing in some capacity as well. And when I was thinking about like Satoshi as a prophet, and then just really considering like, what is a prophet, and why do we have prophets over history, and what they've meant for like the change of humanity and bringing light to humanity, and kind of thinking of a prophet as someone who brings divine messages that challenge existing systems and inspire change. But then it kind of got me thinking about like the prophet within each of us. And yeah, like, is it something like, do we have to? Because here's my question for you, because I found that, like, if I was spending too much time in the dark, like, I had a couple years solid where I felt like I was in the dark night of the soul, and I really needed to be, and I needed to see to get to here. But, like, is there a balance? Is there a way to, like, see all this? Like, you've clearly just really opened your eyes and, like, saw so much of, what isn't serving us, what hasn't been serving us throughout history. How do we come out of that, or not even out of that? How do we use that to then fuel us to be, I don't know,
I
better
I think for
located?
everybody it's a bit different.
Yeah.
I think the delving into that abyss, that like, look, first of all, like it's truly the thick of darkness and night, and going into it is truly terrifying. Like that's why it is existential anxiety and the deepest truth. But in my opinion, as you go into that, you go deeper and deeper into it, and you go, oh my God, it's so black, it's so dark. How is it possible to ever solve these problems? And
Yeah.
to me, what Bitcoin represents is it's this tiny glimmer of light that starts to grow as you get deeper in there. And as you look at that tiny glimmer of light and you go, well, maybe I should pursue this. Maybe it'll get brighter as I go towards it. I have more questions. Why could this be a light in the thick of this darkness where we're talking about some radically fucking evil stuff? We're talking,
Yeah.
like I have a whole theory about like the sort of war we engage in now. Like it's not even war anymore. It's just route killing without any purpose to it other than maybe making some money off of the capacity to be able to do that. Like that's so fucking dark. And
Yeah.
trying to deal with the pain of what that means and what it means to exist in a world where that does, it can be so overwhelming. And to me, again, that's why I attach myself to Bitcoin so much, is that there's a real possibility that if I can get other people on board with this and collectivize with this, again, not for number goes up, but
Yeah.
simply to have a piece of economic wealth that doesn't have anything to do with the nation state or its exploitative and murderous intentions, there becomes a real possibility to create something new in the world, radically new. And so far that we don't
Mhm.
have to deal with the totality of human creativity, ingenuity, and productivity to have these venomous viper parasites suckling away at all of that.
Yeah.
And I think to me, if we can actually have a real conversation about that, there becomes real potential to change something. And one of the things that speaks to me so much is that in 1750, the idea of a republic was an absolute absurdity. It was seen as such a radical step away from everything that people knew, that it was laughable. And yet by 1850, pretty much every single government on the planet was now a republican form of government. to me, this represents of that very similar to what Victor Hugo told us, that uh, an idea whose time has come. I forget the whole quote, but essentially, like, that's what Bitcoin is. And the real question is that now, as a technologically advanced society that has the internet,
True.
something that 100 years ago, the internet was an absolute absurdity of magic that now
True.
exists actively in the world, and most people are involved with it.
Yeah.
Maybe we could use this to create a new kind of political system. And I'm not talking about political parties or parliaments or
No.
even boundaries or borders, but something so different than
Yeah.
anybody ever expected.
Yeah.
Why don't we actually have a dialogue about it? Because I believe that if we start actually trying to go into that dark night of the soul, that part of coming out of it is realizing that we are actually self-sovereign individuals that can collectivize
Mhm.
ourselves to create a new political dynasty for all people everywhere. And what's
Mhm.
at stake in that is the entirety of the future. And with us both having children, one of the things that I reflect on frequently is, how do I leave my children something at all? How do I
Yeah.
have any meaningful way to leave them wealth, the
Yeah.
assurance that the political system's operable, or that
Yeah.
they'll be able to actually have privacy? Right now, those aren't guarantees in any meaningful way, but I do have the tools to build those things, and I know the people that can build them, and we
Yeah.
have the will and the desire to do so.
Yeah.
And so maybe speaking to it and the possibility of the real hope that is Bitcoin and the hope that cryptography offers to our world, maybe, just maybe, there's a potentiality to escape this darkness. And so for me, I'm going to continue to run towards that little light because it's getting brighter and brighter.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, it was just a pinprick when I got started in Bitcoin, and it's grown by magnitudes hundredfold since then. So
Yeah.
I'm quite confident we're moving in the right direction, but many people probably need to join me at this point and watch the light get brighter for them. And I'm very
Yeah.
excited about that because, the last 2 years, I probably traveled all over the world more than 200,000 miles, flying to all sorts of different events with Bitcoiners, on 4 different
Mhm.
continents. I've had hundreds of conversations with people about them having truly transcendental spiritual awakenings through
Yeah.
Bitcoin, and it fucks them up too. Like,
Yeah.
they come to me kinda nervous and awkward and weird, and they go, "I know you've talked to other people about this, and let me tell you about my experience." And it's kinda funny because I always laugh and I go, "Yeah, I've had hundreds of people tell me about these really crazy beliefs, and you're not alone. It's not crazy. What's crazy is this world where we're told, yeah, elect a sociopathic business person or a completely ethical socialist who these two people can solve the problem. It's bullshit, and it's
Yeah.
wrong,
Or
and it's a
somehow
lie, and it
human.
hurts all of us.
Yeah. Well, that's just really, I wanna say positive, but it's so much more than that. It's like, when I went through my dark night of the soul, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Like, I found a home in myself and in the ability to look at things and not have it affect my capacity to just enjoy life. Like, one of the things about, well, being Capricorn, so I actually found out Bitcoin is a Capricorn, and I'm gonna be talking about that too based on its time of birth. And I'm a Capricorn, and it makes total sense to me. But one of the things about being a Capricorn is that it's associated, like, kinda with the darkness, like, and the dark humor in things. Like, once you can truly see the darkness and all of the shit, you actually gain, like, an ability to laugh and to be humorous about these things that are so insanely horrible, because you realize, one, that you're, like, a bit, you can detach from it, not in a numbing sense, but in a way, especially when you have a connection to humanity and our potential to solve problems creatively through consciousness and through the access that we all have to creative consciousness. And I really see Bitcoin as a product of creative consciousness and oneness, finding solutions. And something that gave me, even before I found the light of Bitcoin, something that gave me a lot of hope was, like, in that knowing that the light is still like a team. We still got a team of change makers and light workers, and like we've been doing this. Like this is not new. It's just that Bitcoin offers us, like you say, that light to not just have hope about or like see grow, which has definitely happened for me. Like I don't even really um I can't even really describe just how much that light grows. But not only that, but like a community where we can come together with others that are also willing to see the dark, or have these conversations so that we can create a new normal. The new normal, because the normal right now is unwell, it's sick, it's like even in health, like what is considered normal is sick, and the new normal is well and healthy and not wanting to take our lives or just numb out, because we can be part of something that is super innovative, super creative, and actually aligns with the values and the morals with which I think are most people. It's just that we're willing to say, "Hey, we want to create something from those values that aligns with those values, not just falsely participate in a system that tells us it aligns with our values."
Absolutely. And I think as you go into that darkness and you start to get light, you start to see that the darkness isn't all encompassing and totalizing as we thought. Like we're just in a cave, and
Yeah.
that's all. And it just means that everyone within that cave also is trying to apply logic and forms of knowledge that aren't actually logical or forms of knowledge at all, but have just been pedantic authoritarian decrees that people have believed through and through and made it into truth. And so to me, like one of the most empowering things is getting that, like, this is just a form of knowledge. Like that's all. And so like Bitcoin can't be destroyed. And even if there was something erroneous, like we have all of the tools to build it back up from its substrate. And in addition to, we still have all of the protections of cryptography. And as we start to realize that we want this truth and we come to that community together, we realize that this is what it's all about. Like it's not, we don't want number to go up forever. Like what we truly want is we want real law and we want real fairness. And I want to know that my money is mine, your money is yours, and that nobody has the power to create money. And I love the little I think Pete Rizzo was the first one who tweeted it, is that crypto is the idea that anyone and everyone should be able to create money. Fiat is the idea that only governments should be able to create money. And Bitcoin is the idea that no one should be able to create money. And to me, like, it's just about returning to a fair rule set where there are no emergency decrees. There is no capacity to steal from others. And that also means the self-sovereignty of that, like, yeah, you can destroy your Bitcoin if you're being thoughtless with it. You can destroy your Bitcoin if you don't have appropriate security. And it's really important to take that self-responsibility in the same way that it takes self-responsibility to own a gun. You can absolutely kill yourself if you are not being safe and thoughtful when using a firearm. And if you're being safe and thoughtful with a firearm, it can absolutely save your life, just like Bitcoin. And so it's really important to have those powers of self-sovereignty, because it turns out that when we give that power away, whether it's to police to protect us, to a government to make sure that we're safe, that we put ourselves in a position of danger because we're not empowered anymore. And what
Yeah.
I've found with Bitcoin is that it is a collective of individuals who want more than anything to teach you forms of self-sovereignty, whether that's self-sovereignty over your mind and
Yeah.
understanding what hypnosis does. Because to me, like I've studied neurolinguistic patterning and hypnosis.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found extremely powerful in that is just through understanding it, you can see people using it on it. And I thought it was interesting that I went to a really interesting workshop earlier in the year, had a really great time, but in it, like they were doing very powerful hypnotic techniques that they had not talked to people about. So the moment that I saw that, I was like, fuck no, I do not consent. I'm not playing this game with you guys in this space. And I went around and told everybody else. And it was kind of interesting because there was a contentious conversation at the end where I was like,
Mhm.
look, I know you're trying to help us, but you are hypnotizing us without our consent. And like, you should have been straight up with us from the beginning of that, like, hey, we're going to do some hypnosis stuff in
Yeah.
order to get you deeper and to be able to encourage this
Exactly.
experience. And I told him I wasn't willing, like, I know your intentions were good, but I was not willing to go into a place of
Yeah.
vulnerability without you telling me. So now
Yeah,
when I
there was
turn on the
no
news
consent.
and, I see a commercial come on for McDonald's, I'm very aware of the
Yep.
hypnotic cues that are being
Yeah.
implemented there. And when you start to see that, you start to see it all around you in all the different ways. And it's really important because that's a form of knowledge that you only get and see through understanding how it's being used. In the
Yeah.
exact same way that you only understand money once you actually focus in on it and start to understand where the real errors are in it and how it's used to manipulate you. And to
Mhm.
me, one of the most interesting things is how often we get these talking heads on TV who tell us all of this kind of financial trickery, when it turns out at the bottom, they actually don't even know what the hell they're talking about. And it's pretty interesting because, like, there's really great clips on the internet,
Yeah.
of I'm
Oh
trying to
my
remember who it was.
gosh,
It was one of the
totally.
presidents of the Fed. He was describing how the Treasury creates money from bonds, and he, like, screws the whole thing up in talking about it and doesn't understand it because that's what it is. It's a bunch of financial trickery in order to create a scam at the very bottom
Yeah.
where there's an accounting error that fundamentally is detethered from the universe and the truth that it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point about patterning and money and that connection. That might be good for this panel that we're doing for a conference coming up here in November about the mind and money. Well, and in this channel, which is really this show, which is really shining a light on giving people knowledge about things and how they really work so they can see when they're being used to manipulate them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the best things about learning. Okay, so as we're, in closing, because I know this conversation, we could just talk for days. And in closing, I have a thought, and then I'll give you a moment to just kind of give our listeners a closing thought. Um, I think that what's really come from this conversation that could be helpful to our listeners is that reminder to not be afraid to learn, not be afraid to open your mind and just find information, take in information. And even if it causes you to feel uncomfortable, to just be curious. You don't have to take on anything as this is the way it is. We don't have to be so black or white, good or bad, good or evil, to just start to be really curious about what you might think is happening, what you might have taken on, what you might have just unconsciously believed about yourself or about life or about money, and kind of just start there with a curiosity and a self compassion.
Absolutely, and I think that must be the basis for it. Because if you're trying to force this onto yourself, it's probably gonna be pretty unsuccessful, but, like, to me, this all is about returning to the truth, and, like, what is true about our world? What does actually challenge my beliefs in a meaningful way? Like, what perhaps we're wrong about all of this, and maybe you have wonderful critiques on why that is, and, I'm always open to debating these topics. And what's interesting for me is always following the truth like that. I usually find myself going deeper and deeper into this as opposed to the other direction. And again, I really want to encourage the darkness is really threatening, and, like, you shouldn't force yourself to go too deep into that because, yeah, like, it can cause for very deep and dark depression and despondency. But with that being said, like, I really wanna encourage the only reason I escaped that despondency myself, because when I found Bitcoin, I was in a very, very depressed place. Like, I was contemplating suicide very actively.
Yeah.
And the only reason that I didn't follow that path was because I was like, "Look, like, if I have to work at a dead-end job for the rest of my life and do it, like, there's no way I'll make it through." And when I saw Bitcoin, I was like, "There's potential for something real to happen here. And there's a real potential for it to actually change something in a meaningful way." And you know what? I would rather commit my life towards trying to transform what money is in the world in a meaningful way so that I know that when I leave my children money in the future, that that'll actually mean something in a meaningful way. And I'm going to choose to pursue that rather than this other system that seems to really want me to follow every single order to the T just for me to be able to eke by. I'd rather try to go do something freakish on my own and see what I can create in my creativity and all of the goodness that I'm gonna share with people that I've encountered on this journey. And for me, what's way more important than Bitcoin for me has now been Bitcoiners. Like, from meeting all of these different individuals who all sincerely want to help me and see me be successful,
Yeah.
I've found that there's a true inclusiveness in a world that I never really thought existed. And to me, it's reintroduced me to the very idea of what community is supposed to be. And I think that through choosing to go into that darkness, really wrestle with those questions and find others who want to wrestle with it too, you'll discover something truly extraordinary. And if it's too threatening for you, I'm certain that you'll be able to find plenty of people who go, "Whoa, that's a crazy idea. How about we talk about the sports game from last night?" And you can do that, and maybe it'll work out just fine for you. But I think really questioning and allowing for yourself to go deep into asking, are these problems solvable, and can we escape from the true nihilism that seems to be consuming the world? Perhaps you'll find a real answer that will empower you and allow for you to transform into the light and love that you want to be in the world.
Mhm. Preach. Yeah. That's why I started helping people to buy Bitcoin and just really get started in it, because even that can be somewhat overwhelming. Then when people think, "Oh my gosh, I gotta do this." And I do wanna touch base on what you said about community and how I do think that we all have a desire to belong and to feel like we belong somewhere. And like you said, if you come out of that or you even start to dip your toes in and you go deeper into that darkness, what a reward it is to then connect with other Bitcoiners. And like you said, I've experienced the same thing where for the first time in my life, even with a career full of giving other people careers and helping them grow their careers, I have never felt so supported and so many people who truly want my success as I have in the Bitcoin community. And I think it's because it's really coming from like a foundation of wanting to be part of something and create something together that makes the world a better place. And so there is no competition because it's us against the world, baby.
And there's very much a vibe like that, and it's pretty great because, like, I've found a number of times sitting down, with founders from companies that are directly competing with each other, and that they'll have really great
Yeah.
open dialogues and be very friendly and kind with each other, and that's part of the whole vibe that we put out,
Wow.
and, for me in my writing, a lot of it was for me to really try to resolve questions on my own that were really important, but I found through the presentation of my work, a lot of people it really opened people up to a lot of radical new horizons that has
Yeah.
continually fulfilled and rewarded me to where now I feel very on purpose and in a mission in my life, and that's to me, I wanna present philosophy not as an academic, but as a true inquiry into what is the purpose of this life? Is it to be little worker bees that fulfill and serve the state? Or is it to remember that there's something much deeper and more important about what our life is and what we share together and what we create in the world? And for me, I want to be able to step away at the end of my life and bow gracefully to the posterity that hasn't came yet and be able to say, I spent my life committed towards and working on this project because I knew what it would mean for you and for your generation and for the future that is to come.
Yeah.
And we reserve this specifically for you and our incapacity to be able to rob you in the future of what it means to have a true self-sovereign money that you can use to choose to create the world that your future needs, not the one that I believe your future needs.
Yeah. And will continue to evolve. And evolution is inevitable. So to be a part of evolution in a way that could really bring more light, bring more actual abundance and health and the well-being of humanity is a noble cause indeed.
Absolutely, and just on a finishing note, I just wanna say
Yeah.
that, I have an essay in my book that's called, Messianic Bitcoin, and, like, kind of at the deepest levels, like, I truly
Mhm.
believe that this is messianic because of the way that it redeems humanity from the evil that is fiat and introduces what I believe to be a messianic law, a new form of law that utilizes cryptography as its substrate so that no longer do we need to deal with courts and judges and justices and people deciding what is the law. There's a
Mhm.
unitary law that is Bitcoin now that anybody anywhere can use for their own purpose to store their wealth, that no government anywhere can steal from them. That is a radically redeeming thing to all of humanity. And today, if everyone was to understand what Bitcoin actually is and go on a Bitcoin standard, the world would radically change overnight
Yeah.
in the best of possible ways.
True. It introduces a new social contract rooted in cryptography, and spiritual freedom.
Absolutely. And what it
That's what
means
I
to
got.
have the decision on yourself to
Mhm.
choose that. So,
Yeah.
with that being
Yeah.
said, I really encourage people that don't look at the economic part first. Like
Yeah.
look at the spiritual liberation that can come from this first and follow that
Yeah.
thread. And through that you'll find the economic liberation that must always be inclusive in spiritual liberation.
That's a great closing statement. And I'll be sure to put a link to your site and to your book in the show notes.
Excellent.
And I just want to give you a huge thank you for delving into these topics so deeply for our audience and having this conversation with me, Erik.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Heather. These are the conversations that really light me up and I find very important. So I'm happy to know that you're out there having these conversations.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Remember to hit the subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you'll know right away when we have a new episode with another great guest. And if this episode got you wanting to buy Bitcoin, reach out to me. I'm an agent with Bitcoin Well, and I have a link down below to book a time in my calendar. And simply just book a call with me and we can get you started buying Bitcoin. And don't worry, no pressure. Let's have a conversation and see how Bitcoin can improve your life. Ciao for now.